Thank you very much. So first of all, I thank the organizers for their invitation, especially Jean-Marc Delors, who took care of a lot of things. And also, I would like to to address my special thanks to Patrick, because in fact he is an organizer, but also he is my collaborator. And in fact, 10 years ago exactly, I went to Orsay for a sabbatical and asked him to work on PDEs. I was working on complex analysis at that time. And it has been the beginning of the story of the cubic Zegue equation. And I think it's a nice mathematical story that I'm going to speak about now. Okay, so in fact, I will just give the details of what Joseph Thirouin spoke about yesterday. First, I would like to give short motivation for that. So our aim is to study the long-time behavior of Hamiltonian systems and to study systems where you can see wave turbulence phenomena or weak turbulence or whatever. And so it's natural to restrict ourselves to compact case instead of the case we just have seen in Rn. So, in order to do computation, it's natural to look at the tori so that you have harmonic analysis as a natural tool. And so the typical example is NLS on the torus, cubic and NLS on the two-dimensional torus. So it's the same as before, except that you look at the two-dimensional torus. And it's well known that it is an Hamiltonian system. And we have already seen that the Hamiltonian is the 1/2 of the kinetic energy plus the L force norm. Okay. And as Joseph said yesterday, the invariance by multiplication by complex number of modulus 1 gives also the conservation of the mass, which is given by the L2 norm. And it gives that, of course, the H1 norm remains bounded on trajectories. And it goes back to Bourgain and Stafilani that the problem independently, that the problem is well posed in any HS. It's well posed in HS for any S strictly positive, and that there is a gross, an upper bound, which is polynomial in HS. So of course it is interesting for S larger than 1. And the question, the open question given by Bourgain in 2000 was to know whether you can construct solution with the unbounded HS norm. Existence of solution with unbounded HS norm. And this is related to wave turbulence phenomenon. let me just explain a little bit about that. If it was so, if you can construct an initial data giving rise to such an exploding HS norm, well, unbounded HS norm, you will be able to construct a sequence Tn with the HS norm of your solution going to infinity. So for some S larger than 1, you will have this going to infinity with as n going to infinity as the H1 norm remains bounded by the conservation laws. And this means that you should have the Fourier coefficient for large k becomes large, so that your solution oscillates at that time. Oh. Each time I forget to use the button. Okay, so it means that you should have this. Cap become large as k is large. And this is the way to measure the turbulence. Okay, at least it is the only way that we imagine for the moment. Okay, so there are very few results in the literature. The main result is, has been proved by the team of 5, the Colliander, Kiel, Stafilani, Tao, and Takaoka. And so they prove that for any small delta and any large k, you can construct for any S larger than 1, you can construct initial data with a small HS norm smaller than delta, which can reach an HS norm larger than k at if you wait for a sufficiently long time. And so this has been done by the 5. I don't write the name. And after that, it has been also extended to some particular case, for instance, by Annie, for initial data close to a plane wave. And it has been also precise by Guardia and Kaloshin. And also there are results in the same area by Os and Processi and so on. Okay, but from now on, as far as we know, there is no turbulence phenomenon for the cubic NLS. So it remains an open question. There is on the unit, on the two-dimensional torus. On the one-dimensional torus, there is no question of turbulence because the cubic NLS in that case is completely integrable, and all the conservation laws dominate the HS norm. So there is no way to have turbulence. And there is only one result in which you have a positive result, which is on R times cross the two-dimensional torus. It has been done by Annie, Posader, Svetkov. Yeah, Svetkov. Tizi. and Biciglia. It's almost the only things. Okay, so as Joseph told you, in fact, for the cubic Zeige equation and also for the quadratic one, we are able to exhibit some turbulence phenomenon. So I'm going to explain that now. So we introduced this equation for many reasons, and one of them was to understand the half-wave equation, but I'm not going to speak too much about it. So I recall you that the cubic Zeige equation is given by this equation on the one-dimensional torus. Here pi is what is usually called the Zeige projector. It just kills all the Fourier coefficient of negative mode. Okay. And it's an Hamiltonian system. In fact, it is only an ODE, but it is an Hamiltonian system, and the energy is given by 1/4 the Helmholtz norm. And as Joseph told you, the invariance by translation and by multiplication by complex number of modulus 1, you have still the mass, which is preserved, and also the momentum. And so I should say that this is the Hamiltonian system. We consider it only on L2+, which is given by, which is the projection of L2 of the torus. Okay, so thanks to the fact that we are only considering a function which has non-negative Fourier modes, this is interesting because if you add a Q and this momentum, and denote it by M of U, you get that something which is equivalent to the H1 norm is preserved. H1 half norm is preserved by the flow. So that's why yesterday Joseph said that the H1 half norm is preserved. It's an equivalent quantity. In fact, it's called the Dirichlet norm, but whatever. Okay, so from usual method, you can prove easily that, it's well posed in HS of the torus for any S larger than 1/2. And in fact, Herbert Corr and Patrick proved that it is also well posed in BMO, but for today, I will not speak about that. And what is the result on the dynamic? I'm going to write the result here. Okay, so I'm going to put all the results together. Well, So the first thing, if you use the usual method, what you get is that you have an upper bound on the HS norm, which is a double exponential. And our first improvement is to prove that, in fact, for S only larger than 1, we have an exponential upper bound. And we have the following turbulence phenomenon. So if I consider, well, I don't know, there exists a dense G delta subset of initial data in C infinity plus. I'm going to denote it by G. Such that for any initial data in this set, if for any S larger than 1/2, for any M larger than 1, if you want, we have the following. If I look at the solution of the Zege equation, and I take the sublimit of this quantity, this is infinite, as the lim_inf is bounded, and we know that if you take the mean value of, let's say, the H1 norm of the solution, then the limit sup as t goes to infinity is also infinity. So what does it mean? It means that since you have a polynomial growth for any m, it means that it is almost an exponential growth, so our first estimate is almost optimal. These things prove that the times where you have this growth is large enough, it's not too thin. And you have this phenomenon, this strange phenomenon that says that from time to time you have growth and then you come back to the initial data in some sense. Okay. So I should say that this part the proof is based on an argument developed by Hani on a Baire category argument okay. And I should also emphasize that here we don't have any explicit example, in opposite with the example of Joseph of yesterday. Joseph proved that for his quadratic Zege equation, he has an explicit example with exponential growth. In fact, there is another result by another student of Patrick Ai and Xu, who also study a variant of the cubic Zege equation, and she proves the same. And there is also, in fact, I should have given this example before, Oana Pokovniku, we prove that on the real line, you can produce an example with polynomial growth. Okay. So now I can explain. So the thing is that here we are able to produce explicit formula so that we can study precisely the dynamic. Okay, so as Joseph told you that yesterday, we have two lax pairs. So two lax pairs. And they are related to the Hankel operator. So let me remind you that Hankel operator of symbol U, for U, let's say, since Joseph told you that it's well defined when U is the projection of a L infinity function, HU of F is given by pi of U F bar. So it's an anti-linear operator, but if you look at the Fourier side, it's the multiplication by the infinite Hankel matrix, which has coefficient on the anti-diagonal given by the Fourier coefficient of the symbol. And it's just the action of it on the Fourier coefficient of the conjugate of the Fourier coefficient of F. So it's why it is called the Hankel operator. It's because of that property. Okay? So, so the trick is that what we proved is that if U is a solution of the Zegue equation, then if you compute the derivative of the Hankel operator of symbol U of t, what you get is the commutator of BU HU, where BU is an anti-linear, anti-self-adjoint operator. And why? What? Oh, excuse me. Okay. And so as a consequence, it's usual to obtain that HU at times t is unitarily equivalent to HU at time 0. Just the trick is just to consider the operator valued solution of du of this equation. U at time 0 is identity. Then it's easy to check that you have U star t, HU of t, U of t is HU at 0. And it's easy also to check that thanks to this property, U is unitary. Okay, so thanks to this property, you get that the spectrum of HU is preserved by the flow. And so, for instance, you have that the finite rank Hankel operator are preserved. And since Hankel operators are well known in the literature, you can find easily that the finite rank Hankel operator corresponds to rational function. So this is the first lax pair. And we have another one. So the other one is the one, the same as the one of Joseph in the quadratic case. It's given by the shifted Hankel operator. So maybe before going to the other lax pair, I would like to emphasize something. So since you have this unitarily equivalence between HU of t and HU at time 0, you have in particular that the Hilbert-Schmidt norm of HU is invariant by the flow. But this is easy to compute from the matrix side representation. If you look at the matrix given by the Fourier coefficient of U and you compute its Hilbert-Schmidt norm, what you get is the sum of the Fourier coefficient to the square, and you immediately recover what we call the H1 half norm, so that you recover that this quantity, which was the sum of the mass and of the momentum, is preserved by the flow. Okay, so we have this, and we have also that rational functions are preserved. Okay, so the second lax pair, so it's just, you consider Ku as yesterday, it's S star HU of, or HUS or H of S star U, where S is the shift, so it's given by the multiplication by exponential Ix, for instance, or it is also, if you want, the Toeplitz operator associated to this symbol. And in fact, this property is characterized completely the Hankel operator. It's natural for harmonic analysis to use both these operators, but well, it's natural, but there is still some question. Okay, I will go to it later. And so the thing is that if you compute, you do the same, you compute this, then you get another anti-self adjoint operator Cu. And so you find again that the Ku of t is unitarily equivalent to Ku at time 0. Okay, so this property drives us to consider, to understand the spectral properties of both operators, HU and KU. And a careful analysis allows us to prove the following. So we get an explicit formula. I don't know, 3 maybe. Theorem. So since, for instance, if I'm going to consider for capital N an integer. I'm going to look first at symbol such that the rank of HU is equal to the rank of KU is equal to N. So since HU and KU are not linear, they are antilinear, it's natural to look at HU square and KU square, which are self-adjoint operators. And so if I denote by S square the family of eigenvalues of HU square that I assume to be all of them are different. So I denote this by S square, this family of decreasing eigenvalues of HU square. I take the same assumption on the eigenvalues of a KU square. So under this assumption, I have the following. The first thing is that there is automatically interlacement of the eigenvalues, meaning that S1 square is larger than S tilde 1 square, and so on. So the eigenvalues intertwined, and the last one remains that one. Okay. And so these come from a min-max formula, and the main ingredient is also to observe that KU square is HU square minus rank 1 operator. Okay. And the explicit formula is the following. You can form a n by n matrix C at any point of the unit circle. You form the following. I should say that there exists family of angles, psi and psi tilde. Psi is exponential I psi j for j between 1 and n, and psi tilde is exponential I psi tilde j. So there exist families of such elements on the torus, so that if I consider this matrix, this matrix is invertible, and u of exponential ix is given by the invert of this matrix applied to the vector made of 1, the n-dimensional vector in Cn. So this is just a manner to say that you sum all the coefficients of this matrix. So you get that if I take any function u such that the rank of HU and the rank of KU equal n with all these assumptions, then you have a way to recover u by this way, by this formula. And of course, the interesting thing is to look at the Zeghe dynamic. So to simplify, I will write, I didn't say, but it's also a bijection, meaning that if I take any sequence like this, if I consider such a formula, then the corresponding symbol has the sequence S square as the eigenvalues of HU square, and the sequence S tilde square at the value as the eigenvalue of KU square. Okay. So what about the Zegge dynamic? So I'm going to write, to simplify, that this formula U is given by U of S, S tilde, psi, and psi tilde. And the Zegge dynamic is what? If I start with the initial data U naught, which correspond to U of S, S tilde, psi, and psi tilde, then the Zegge solution with this initial data is given by U of T corresponds to the symbol. Of course, S and S tilde does not move since they are conservation law for our equation. And only the angles are going to move. Psi with exponential I square T, psi tilde exponential I S tilde square T. Okay. So minus? It's always the mistake I do. Okay. Okay. Okay, so once we have this formula for finite rank, of course we can extend it first when the rank of HU is equal to n and the rank of KU is equal to n minus 1. It means only that the last eigenvalues of KU square is 0, and then you just forget it in the matrix, and it's the same. You have the same formula. And also, we can obtain the analogous formula for infinite rank symbol. Anyway. So, but you can imagine that now you know exactly how you can write the solution of the equation. You can produce turbulence if you make the Sj and the Sk go closer, because the inverse of the matrix is will behave badly. Okay. So I would like to show you a baby example. So it's an example of two symbols. For the moment, I don't speak about the Zegge equation. So I take three eigenvalue. In fact, it's a square root of the eigenvalues here. So I just take a rank 2 Hankel operator and rank 1 KU. Okay? So I just take n equal 2 with S tilde n S tilde 2 equals 0. Okay, so and the first state is you take angles which are 0, 0, and pi in the first state. So you form the corresponding matrix that I gave here, and you compute it. It's not too difficult because it's just a 2 by 2 matrix. So you do it, and what you find is this symbol. So it's a rational function as expected, and you see that even when epsilon goes to 0, this rational function is very smooth because the only pole is at 2 over epsilon, and nothing occurs. It's nice. So now consider the other state, psi 1 equals 0, psi tilde 1 equals 0, so with the same eigenvalues, but now you take psi 2 equals 0. So psi1 and psi2 are in phase. And when you compute this, the corresponding symbol, now you find that you have still a rational function, but now the pole is at 2 over 2 minus epsilon square, so that when epsilon goes to 0, it goes to 1, so it becomes bad. Okay, so I claim that in fact we can go from this initial data. If you take this as an initial data, you can reach something like this with the Zegue dynamic. So I just want to show you a little movie. So it's not exactly the same initial data as the preceding one here, but you can imagine that if epsilon is small enough, then this is nothing but a constant, and here you have something as exponential ix plus some epsilon. So you can ask R1, he's sleeping? No, he's not sleeping, not yet. And so, and he produced a nice movie. What? You are afraid about the movie, maybe? Oh, I hope it's going to work, yeah. So you see that it's particularly smooth for some time, and then you have these bad things which occurs here, okay? So here you have a large derivative, and it corresponds to the fact that you reach the second... comment je fais après? What? What?
What is plotted?
What is, oh yeah, excuse me. Here, the drawing is the real part of the solution, excuse me. So of course, at the beginning, yeah, of course. At the beginning, what you, well, no, it's not the beginning. Well, I'm not good at that. So for some time, you have the cosinus x plus epsilon, and then you have this bad pole, anyway. Okay. So, in fact, if you write the corresponding solution like this, then in the solution I just show you the pole at the origin is 0 because you just start with exponential ix plus epsilon, so you have this disappear. So you start with p epsilon at 0 is 0. And then, in fact, what you can see is that it goes close to the unit sphere. Here, well, I didn't draw it, but you have the unit sphere approximately. And it goes close to the unit sphere, and then it comes back to 0, and so on. Okay. So, and the time where it goes close to the unit sphere is t n epsilon with this, and we can check on the R1 FAU movie that it works. If you take the good epsilon, okay. So, so if you compute in this example the H1 norm to the square, what you get is 1 over epsilon square, so it is the square of the time where it's bad. And moreover, if you compute the limit of the mean value of this, the H1 norm, then it is exactly plus infinity. So it means that the time where you have this bad behavior is large enough. Okay, so from this baby example, I claim that we can produce, I don't know if I have to turn that. We can produce the proof of the existence of the J delta dense subset of initial data. Okay, so what do you want to prove? You are going to write G as the intersection of N of what? You take initial data in C infinity plus, and let's say that I'm just going to prove, forget about these two things and just concentrate on that one. So you have to, if you consider this set, oh, yeah. Okay, so what I want to prove is that these sets are open and dense. If I prove this, I am done. Because after that, you can use a bare category argument, and it will give that set of initial data such that your solution, Vegas solution, will have this property. Is a dense J delta subset of C infinity plus. Okay, so to prove that it is open, it's easy. It just comes from the well-posedness of the equation. So this comes directly. To prove that it is dense, we are going to use the baby example. So the first reduction is to say that you can consider only rational initial data. And in fact, you can also prove that the function, the initial data with finite rank HU and KU, the rank are equal, and these properties are satisfied. This set is dense also. So we reduce to the preset to V0 equal to U of S tilde psi and psi tilde for some N, S, and S tilde, psi, and psi tilde. And it's enough to prove that any such initial data may be approached by something which satisfies this property. And here it's where the baby example occurs. What you prove, what you say, what you do is to add after the sequence S and S tilde, you add what we call the flower, which corresponds to the preceding baby example, psi tilde, and then you start with the angles corresponding to the preceding nice U epsilon, well, approximately this symbol. So you form this new symbol, and you prove that the main part in the evolution comes from the part I have just considered. Okay. I just want to. I realize that I didn't say all the things I wanted to say, but it's always the case. So I just want to finish maybe by a general problem, or in fact, a general question. In fact, what we have seen is that when you want to produce turbulence, surely it comes from multiplicity of the eigenvalues, or the fact that you can have eigenvalues going close to each other. So the natural question is to ask whether if you have a sequence of, let's say, smooth way to decrease to zero, does it produce something regular? So that's the last little result that I want to check, to give. Non, c'est trop. So consider, so it's our last result. So consider a sequence sigma r and some angles, but in fact we don't care. Just assume that the way sigma r goes to zero is smooth in the following sense. No. And so here sigma r would be the sequence of all the eigenvalues, S and S tilde. And what we proved is that for delta small enough, if you consider the U correspond to this spectral data, for any choice of angles, these are analytic, uniformly, well, analytic in the disk of radius 1 plus eta for some eta depending on delta. And for any choice of psi. So it means that if we start with such an initial data for the Zege equation, it will stay analytic in this unit disk, in this larger disk containing the unit disk. So in particular, you get a very smooth trajectory if U0 is like that. You get a uniformly bounded trajectory in C infinity plus. Okay, so I think I should stop now, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So are there questions? Comments, remarks? Yes?
Maybe you should have said in the last theorem that this formula with U, is in fact the one you gave by passing to the limit.
Yeah.
You never discussed this formula for an infinite
I
sequence.
I said it.
You said it very
quickly.
briefly.
Yeah.
Very briefly.
Other questions? Okay, I do have a small question about this theorem.
Yeah.
So this is so the generic behavior is unboundedness in the sense of Baire category, but is it really the typical behavior you expect for the solutions?
No, we don't.
I mean, there are different kinds of genericity. So would it be possible to think about, for example, randomly chosen initial data for which you could perhaps prove something quite
completely different? Yeah. We don't know.
Probably closer to that.
Yeah. That's what we are looking at, but
Yes, but analyticity is not generic.
No.
but
Then it depends on the random choice, okay? So
Yeah, okay.
Very, very sensitive to that. Of course, you can define, in fact, some invariant measures due to this action angle
Yeah.
variable.
Mhm.
Even from that point of view, it's not so easy to prove that almost surely the solution will be, then it depends, of course, of the decay of the S. So if the S is decaying enough, how can you prove that this is almost surely in some big separate space? This is still an open question. And this is, in fact, I think this is the quantitative content of your question. So, given a sequence sufficiently decaying, maybe not geometrically, but a little bit less, can you prove that almost surely on the angles, the solution is regular enough? Probably true, but you can't prove it so far.
Other questions? No, then thank you again.